Okay, we're going to have a very interesting conversation this morning, and I think it's just leaping up of all the things we've been speaking about in the last day and a quarter. And really talking about philanthropy, but this time in terms of local incentives and fostering local giving. And we all know that philanthropy has become really something that is an interesting conversation now, but also we're also thinking about different ways which is face and solve the challenging issues that we're all dealing with in Africa and across Africa, and looking for different ways to manage those things. And one of the things I was speaking to Funke about was even talking about aviation and moving around, the comfortability of even, when we talk about partnerships, how are we even managing partnerships? How do we get from one country to another? We're talking about all these things, but how do we move? We want to do a program in Kigali today. We want to get to Accra the next morning. From Accra, we want to get to South Africa. How do we move around? But we're going to also talk about impact investment as well, and seeing how best to manage those things. And I'll start first of all with Henrietta. Henrietta, social investment and giving has become something that we all talk about. But a lot of people tend not to understand what it means also by impact investment. We're still on the grantee, we just want to get grants. But a lot of organizations are asking now for an investment and a return on investment. And a lot of local organizations, even here, are asking on that as well. Can you just talk briefly about that, and let's get the conversation started?
Okay, so I think the confusion lies in the way we've been all brought up to think that there's a dichotomy between profit making and social impact. So we think that if you want to be really rich, you have to make a lot of money. And if you want to do social impact, then you have to be an NGO or non-profit. The truth is, the two things are compatible and can be reconciled. And if you look very closely at what the richest people in the world are doing, you will find that the reason why they're actually very wealthy and for a long time is because they're making a positive impact. They have provided a solution, something that is relevant to everybody, something everybody needs, and so people are willing to pay for it. So why is Bill Gates the richest man in the world? Because he's provided a solution. There's almost no country in the world you go to and you won't find a PC working on the Microsoft operating system. Why is Dangote the richest man in Africa? He's providing something we all need. Africa is a developing continent. We need cement, and he's providing that. And before cement, food, clothing, and shelter. So it's the biggest mistake we can make is to think that if we want to make a lot of money, we should just think of what we do. And I think that this question dovetails very much into what Innocent mentioned yesterday, which is, while looking at philanthropy, not to forget the situation that has led to the need for philanthropy. When we think about the current economic system, which is actually what I will term predatory capitalism, it's all about making money in a way that makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. And that polarization is what has put us in a situation that has created the global threat we're all now facing. There's almost no country in the world that's not faced with terrorism, which is a consequence of a poor economic system. And that's all the more reason why we have to look towards fostering impact investing, which is for profit with a social purpose. Identify problems and try to develop profitable business models that will allow a solution in a consistent way. Donor dependency is not sustainable. Anybody depending on donors will not be able to do the good they want to do for a long time. We have to find financially sustainable ways of solving problems. And this is really what impact investing is all about. In other words, for profit with a social purpose.
Can you just give an example, just a very brief example?
Oh, there's so many. So for instance, let's look at a dire need here in Lagos, for instance. Clean public toilets. They're almost inexistent. So you find them, but they're not well kept. And I carried out a feasibility study on this, and you won't believe how profitable the poor facilities are. So you can imagine how lucrative it will be to have clean commercial public toilets available. So this is one solution that will not only improve sanitation and prevent avoidable deaths, it will also create wealth, create jobs, and it's a win-win for all society. So it's a good I think it's a good example of for-profit with a social purpose.
Okay, I'll go to you, Martin. And I know you've done a lot of innovative financing in terms of being the CEO of nutrition, but also, when we talked about investing and fundraising and looking, and one of the things Henrietta has mentioned about looking for solutions to the issues and the challenges that we're facing, there's so many ways that we can look at it, but we tend to kind of look at things in a box. when we open our minds, I mean, I was speaking to you, I said sometimes this thing takes 3 years to accomplish. The challenges we're facing are so dire. We need to solve the problems. I mean, in the last panel, they were talking about now. Everything needs to be sorted out now. How do we wait for that time? Yeah, we're looking for investments. How do we wait for 2 years? I mean, you told me sometimes it takes you up to 2 years to even just to make sure that this thing happens. The partnership comes in place. How do we wait for 2 years to get it sorted out? And when we are talking about matching funds as well, it's one of the things that even when we speak about partnerships, matching funds, how do we relate those two together?
Well, thank you. Well, yes, I think that one of the greatest challenges that we have in philanthropy is patience. And for those individuals here from the private sector, I would guess that your CEO and your board all have 5-year business plans. And therefore, why should we in philanthropy think through a model of instant gratification when the private sector to whom we wish to partner with are looking through business plans in terms of a 5-year spectrum? In terms of the power of nutrition, and just briefly for those of you who don't know us, which I would imagine would be the majority of people here, the power of nutrition is all about providing the welfare and care for children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia on the basis and on the metric of stunting. Now, in Nigeria particularly, given that we are here, although I would remind everybody this is the African Philanthropy Forum, not the Nigerian Philanthropy Forum, is that the stunting rates in Nigeria are 32%. In other words, 32% of children under 5 are stunted. Now, what does stunting mean? Stunting is an affliction, sadly, that hides in plain sight. It is a social injustice all around the height of a children that is too short for their age, with an IQ that is less than that age would normally provide. And why is that important? That is really important in terms of not because someone is physically small, but because of the non-communicable diseases that actually are associated with that internal body armor that does not have that protection. And clearly, if you don't have the right IQ, you're not going to be able to hold down those really big, large jobs that you want to, is going to get the economy moving. So if you really have a stunted workforce, which you will have if you do not get to these children before the age of 5, you're going to have a stunted economy. So when we look at our really long-term objectives, this is a real oil tanker that we're trying to turn around. This takes a long time. There's 155 million children in the world that are stunted, under 5s that are stunted. That is like being punished for a crime that you never committed. So you're daily there, you are not going to make, you're not going to be able to transform your lives simply because of the nutrition inequality that you're provided. You mentioned the matching, and I'll also very briefly go on the matching. We look at a scale. So the Power of Nutrition has already invested in the last 2 years nearly $200 million in 4 countries in Africa: Madagascar, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Liberia. Our pipeline looks like another $250 million to be invested during the course of 2018. We work at a scale that very few other people work at, simply because the scale of the problem that we're looking to address, by the way, it is a really large, as a social injustice. So we have a 4 times matching pledge. For every $1 million that I am granted, I will be able to match through bilateral agreements a further $3 million into that system. So for every $10 million, I do a program of $40 million. We've just done one in Madagascar, probably one of the real orphan countries in Africa, with some regions having stunting in excess of 70% of under 5s being stunted. Madagascar gets, by the way, is only, I think, the 2nd country in the world that gets less donor money than North Korea. So thinking about those large-scale problems, we come to these with large-scale solutions. And yes, timing, as you mentioned right at the beginning, a really classic issue. Let's be patient. These things take time. But once you've given a kid the extra 5 centimeters, when you've given them the extra 10 IQ points, you can never take it away.
Thank you, Martin. I'll go to Kofi. Kofi, you're CEO and President of African American Institute, and of course the Chairman of Ford Foundation. I mean, what's the incentive? I mean, we're talking about local giving, of looking into Africa. And I know that there are a lot of programs and the projects you guys are working on right now, and in terms of speaking out and changing the narrative of the way we see Africa and the way we invest in Africa. Why do we have to even look in the first place? I mean, there's so much funding coming in. So why are we looking in, and why are we pushing our own philanthropists to come out and do more? I know one of the panels yesterday spoke about this, and getting more of our philanthropists to understand the issues that we're dealing with in the different African countries. Well, why are you, as Ford and the African American Institute, doing this as well?
Thank you. Actually, you've broken our agreement. We were going to allow Funke just to talk. Yeah, I think that one of the big constraints that we all have is that we see this whole field as all about money and all about big money. And I think that actually takes it out of the hands of most of us, because only a few people seem to be relevant. Everybody talks about the same organizations. And I think the reality is that in the US, philanthropy is very new. I mean, I think Carnegie is credited with kind of starting it in the US, and that was in 1905. And he did a lot of great work, but much of it now we can see could have been done differently, right? Rockefeller started, I think, in 1912, Ford in 1936. I mean, this is a very young field, and there is, it's always good to know what other people are doing, but there's nothing that is beyond our reach in terms of the sophistication of it. So one of the ways that I've been trying to think about philanthropy really is in what are some of the things we can do to change the way people understand Africa and Afro-descendants, not only on the continent, but wherever you find them around the world. There's a remarkable similarity to the condition you'll find of Afro-descendants when you travel. If you go to Brazil, they will all very proudly tell you there's no racism in Brazil, but when you look at who runs everything, who's in power, etc., you'll find the Afro-descendants on the margins, the same in the US. Even though we had Obama, it's still been a real struggle for people, I think, to participate fully. And I think people view Africa as very much on the periphery of everything. People talk about it as a last frontier and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, the narrative is all around how it was discovered, you know, just a few hundred years ago. When you look at the real history, you find that Africa has always been central in the history of the world, and that we've played a huge role, both here on the continent and throughout areas where the diaspora has reached. And so one of the things that we've been doing is just trying to have people of all generations get to understand Africa better. And one of the inspirations for this was there's a Harvard professor, Henry Louis Gates, who did a series called Great African Civilizations. And he did it because he went to a convening of leaders that President Obama, African leaders that President Obama convened. And he realized that if he had bet $1 million and there were almost 50 leaders in the room, he said, and asked them to name 3 great African civilizations, he felt he had a very good chance of leaving with all his money. So what we've been doing is we're partnering with him to start changing how people define what the great civilizations are that you need to learn in order to be educated. Our theory is that if you don't believe you're part of the an important part of the history of the world, and you're told that civilization was brought to you, it changes how you think about yourselves, and it's also may help explain some of the disrespect you see for Afro descent. There's a lot of assumptions about us in terms of being primitive, lack of sophistication, etc. So these are some of the ways that we think we can partner with lots of local organizations who can play a role, and you don't have to have a lot of money to be part of this.
Thank you, Kofi. Funke, I'll just ride on what Kofi just talked about and ask you a very generic question. Do we as Africans even know who we are as Africans? And if we do, how do we have access? And if we don't, how do we have access to kind of move around? I mean, it's one of the issues that we've been dealing with for years. Even coming to Nigeria, and I know trying to get visas to come here, if I ask a number of people that found it so easy to get visas, you just see a few hands up. It takes a bit of time. And going to any other country in Africa, sometimes you have to move up to go west, to go east, to come down. And it takes you 4 days to go to another African country. And we're talking about a lot of partnerships. We're talking about opening up. We're talking about local giving. And when I mean local, I mean African giving. Philanthropists working with people in Nigeria, working with people in Kigali, just walking around Africa. But we do have an issue with that. And we have an issue with advocacy and talking about these things as well. So what do we do? And how do we do things a bit different?
Thank you. So I am Adefunke Adeyemi, and I'm a philanthropist. I'm a philanthropist because I give. I give to individuals, to family and friends, to causes, to organizations, even to strangers. So I'd like a show of hands for every other philanthropist in the room. There you go. So I think half the issue is already resolved. Going back to our roots as Africans, we give. Does anyone know the figure for diaspora giving in the last year? About $60 billion. So the Africans that live abroad send money home for different causes. So we give as a matter of course. What we want to do, though, is we want to ensure that our giving is wider in scope, that our giving is more impactful, that our giving is more structured, and that ultimately our giving perhaps would even give a return on the investments that come from that giving, based on the different projects that we go into. So before I go into Africa, I mean, this is a topic that I'm so passionate about, right? But so I'm going to talk about something. Let's talk about, some of the watershed moments in time. In the 60s and 70s, early 80s, we had the era of freedom. And it wasn't just an era of free love. It wasn't just an era of anyone can do whatever they want. It was also an era of a very high social consciousness. People in that era were concerned and were interested in things happening around the world. They were interested in causes. They were interested in so many issues. So that's why we had protests and all of that. And I think it was in that era that giving to Africa became somewhat institutionalized. Why? Because stories were created around what was happening in Africa: famine, drought, war. So all of a sudden, people who had this high social consciousness and who wanted to do something about it, because of course life couldn't just be about profit and money, right? They started to give. So things were on TV, you would see the child in Somalia, the, starving child, and, there was almost an institutionalization. Even people who didn't have much money would send $10 every other month to a cause for Africa. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because we are now in that era again, and it is a fantastic opportunity for us. And this era is different from the other because we have something that we didn't have before: instant access to information. So for Africans, there's no time lag anymore. Right now, we can do the same things. We know the same things together at the same time, everywhere around the world. And so there's no time lag. And so we have, almost a perfect storm, a lineup of perfect conditions. Socially conscious people, all this new generation, XYZs, whatever they call them, and people who want to do something, people who want to make contribution. A friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Indian, was telling me that giving outside of individual and familial units only became possible about 15 years ago in India because people started to earn more. And when I mean more, we're talking about something in the range of $250 to $500 a day. But because they remember where they're coming from, they gave. So my point here is, as Africans, we give. What we need to do is to raise awareness about how we can give in a more structured manner, how we can widen the scope of giving, how we can really Pan-Africanize it, and how we can almost institutionalize it. Now, going to the issue of connectivity. As you said, do we really know ourselves as Africans? We're 54 African countries, and Africa is not a country. It's a continent. And many times I have to tell people this, and it's not homogeneous. We're not the same. We do have some commonalities, but we are not the same. And so do we know ourselves? Do we know each other? No, because it's very difficult to know each other. You can fit, I'm sure many people don't know this, but in the landmass of Africa, you can fit China, the USA, Mexico, Europe, into the landmass of Africa. That's how big it is. So don't be fooled by what you see on the picture of the map. It is so huge. And to traverse the continent, aviation is a short-term fundamental solution because we don't have railway or highway that traverses the continent from Cape Town to Cairo. So aviation is the way. I mean, aviation is already playing that role today. Aviation is airdropping aid, food, medicines, vaccines, etc., in remote areas where even cars can't get to. So aviation plays a key role. Now, aviation plays a key role in connecting people. The African Union sees aviation as one of the pillars to integrate the continent, right? Unity, prosperity, and regional integration for all. And aviation is one of those pillars. So it's important for us to do this and to ensure that we are having the right conversations with the right stakeholders. So aviation obviously is critical to this conversation, but I would like to flip it on its head and say that we are critical to the conversation in itself because we are advocates, all of us sitting in this room, advocates to take the message to the different stakeholders who can make aviation thrive, ministries, finance, governments, other individuals who can make this conversation happen. So I think I'll pause there.
Henrietta.
Okay, I'd just like to build very quickly on what she's just said. And giving is always something that is encouraged, but we've got to be careful not to create dependence. Okay, we've got to give in a way that creates transformation, in a way that allows people to become financially independent, in a way that makes people know that they can acquire and they become respectable. And so I would like to say that in some instances, just like we were saying yesterday, there are dire circumstances where people are dying of hunger, where they should be helped to live. But if people are healthy, they should be empowered to be able to achieve financial sustainability. Okay, so imagine if we had a construction skills training academy. Believe it or not, here in Nigeria, it's very difficult to get a very good carpenter, plumber, bricklayer, whatever it is. Most construction companies actually go to neighboring African countries to get such skills. To work. But we have a lot of youth unemployment. So if, for instance, we put up some construction skills training academies and we mopped up our unemployed youths and we empower them with these skills, they can easily get jobs. Today, tailors get better paid than graduates. Hairstylists get better paid than graduates. Yes, I know tailors who get paid as much as 250,000 naira, and I know graduates who are queuing up for jobs where they will pay them only 50,000. It's ridiculous. So my point here is, giving is good, but we must give in a way that allows for transformation, in a way that allows for financial independence. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I was going to go to, thank you. I was going to go to Kofi and just hit on what Henrietta said in terms of giving and transforming lives as well. So we have to think and merge the two together. You know, what she says is that the sustainable types of giving is there. But in terms of Ford, and I'm going back to Ford now, you've done a lot of work, not only in terms of just giving the organization and the communities you've worked in across Africa, but a lot of work also in terms of making sure that they also learn impact investments is also seen in the organizations as well. I mean, we were grantees from Ford for so many years when I worked in an older organization, and it was not only about the resources, financial resources. How do we see that as a different a scope in terms of local giving, in terms of what Henrietta is talking about now? That she doesn't want us to just talk about just giving. Philanthropy is not about just giving, but also changing and impacting the society we're working with today.
Okay, so I think there are several parts to that question. I think one of the things that people are talking about with impact investing, and at Ford, we're just starting this. We've just announced that the person who's going to actually run it hasn't yet arrived. He's been selected but hasn't arrived. So we are very, very new to this. But the idea is that rather than focusing on what we do with 6%, which is about what we give out in grants every year of our endowment, we're going to look at what we do with the remainder, the 94%, and start to see if there are some opportunities for us to sustainably invest. We're not aware of anybody who has been able to do this successfully over time with a significant size portfolio. So we're going to take our time. Over the next 10 years, our goal is to have about $1 billion invested in what we would call impact or mission-related investments. And they will be focused initially on things like low-cost housing, financial inclusion. These are some of the areas that we're going to start with. As I said, I don't feel very qualified to talk. I mean, I've read a lot of material now, but it's an experiment we're trying, and we'll just have to see how we do. I think what we've always been trying to do since my involvement with Ford has been to look beyond the grant to the many, many ways we can help. So one of the ways we're often able to help is through the networks that we have. Sometimes we can open doors for people. Sometimes our support of a new idea or an individual that we think we believe in can help lend them some credibility. Right? Everybody knows there's a process before you get support from foundations. The process is often too long, but we won't talk about that. So those are the ways, kind of beyond the grant, that we're trying to play a role.
Martin, thank you.
Impact investing is a really, really interesting topic. And I would think that I have one thing to say about generally people who think of themselves as philanthropists or institutions that are thinking about philanthropy. Please don't discard the principles of business and the laws of economics when you think of philanthropy, because you certainly don't discard it when you think of business. And I have met a lot of philanthropists in my time, incredibly generous individuals and institutions, but somehow philanthropy is treated as different from being in business. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be profitable, because that isn't necessarily in the first instance what you should be thinking through, but you should be thinking through the due diligence of why is your money making impact? Because if you're not thinking through that, you're funding ideology. Don't do that, because that's a waste of time and a waste of money. You get no sustainability, and you're not really getting outcomes and impact. You're looking through the eyes of inputs, and that really isn't where we should be thinking through. Also, when you think about the longer term in terms of how you're going to be engaged, and a lot has been said yesterday and today about partnership and collaboration. And I think those two words are utilized far too often and misunderstood far too often, because it's incredibly difficult working in collaboration and partnership. We at the Power Nutrition do not implement. We have to work with and through others. That means that we have to do one thing and one thing alone. That means we have to compromise. And if you come to a partnership without compromise and get everything that you want, you don't have a partnership. You've just got your own way. And that means that you're not going to get that sustainability and that collaboratively long-term convening of people with a similar type of mindset. So when you think through impact investing, please just think through what is the impact. I mean, I tend to look at it as smart philanthropy rather than impact investing, because sometimes a lot of philanthropists will go through giving money away to wanting a 22% IRR within just one flick of a switch. There's a lot of in between. If I was able to, as a charitable foundation, just get back half of the money that I give away every year, for me that would be incredibly impactful and allow me to do far more money with it. What I can't do is take money in and then suddenly go to a 20% IRR. So when you're thinking through collaboration and partnerships, and indeed with the private sector, it is tough, it is worth it, but it is tough. And I think the last thing I would say is that we always think, and it was spoken about yesterday, there's a trust deficit between the public sector and the private sector. And just to be a little bit edgy here, I think there's a trust deficit within the public sector, within philanthropy, within working together. I was talking to the head of CSR at Statoil, who've got an offshore oil rig just 100 miles off the coast here. And I said, how many companies are involved in actually making that oil rig functional? He said 72 different companies make that oil rig function. I think that's a very good model to thinking through how we do things at scale and ensure that there are just more than one individual organization to actually achieve what we do.
Okay, you want to say something?
No, I absolutely agree with Martin on the point of credibility. I think, I'm sure it's been mentioned over the course of the conference, but credibility is a really fundamental issue. And going to the trust issue, which is the flip side of that, if there's a trust deficit across the spectrum of giving, and if there's a trust deficit for leadership, there's a trust deficit for institutions, and there's just, the trust index is just very low. Who do people trust? People trust today, people trust themselves and their peers. And so if I trust my peer, and my peer is giving to a cause or an organization, I'm more likely to give to that cause or organization because I trust my peer. And I trust that my peer has checked, and that my peer is confident that whatever is given to that organization, the organization is going to do with it what they say they will do with it. So the two work hand in hand, the credibility and trust issue. That's what I just wanted to add to what Martin said.
Thank you. Henrietta, Jeffery.
Yes, I'd like to just remind us that, again, when you look at the amount of funds available through philanthropy and the magnitude of the problems in the world today, they are not proportional. And so, much as all the people here are passionate about helping and seeing a better world, we've got to realize that for us to see the transformation that we want to see, for us to be able to earn the respect of the rest of the world, we have to be able to find a model that allows us earn that respect through improving the way our system. And I think that this is where impact investing comes in. It allows us multiply the funds available through philanthropy such that we can reach more people in a more sustainable way. Because if we keep giving and then the funds run out, then we can't help anymore. But if we're multiplying the funds, because the way we're giving is empowering people who can also empower others, okay, then we're able to multiply the impact and reach further. So I think we need to be thinking in terms of sustainability. Now, we don't also want to fall into the trap other countries are falling into, where people prefer not to work because they have welfare, the Dutch disease. We've got to be careful of that. So I think that philanthropists should be thinking towards evolving to impact investing. Some people confuse impact investing with CSR. They're two very different things. Impact investing has a stronger impact. CSR means I do my business and then give a small percentage back to society. Whereas impact investing involves incorporating giving. So the core strategy of my business is to transform. So I gave a few examples before, the Construction Skills Training Academy. So I train these unemployed youths and I engage them in my facilities management company or in my property development company, and I build at a lower cost because they learn by doing. They also work for me. Or I have a tailoring, I start a tailoring workshop, and these people are trained, and then they feed my production units, and I'm able to take on large orders because I have a large pool of hands. So I've empowered the ladies, okay, or the guys, whoever is interested in learning to sew. They earn a salary because they can work for me or work on their own because they've been empowered. And I'm able to take on large orders that will allow me export. So today, for instance, African fashion is very much in vogue. I watched this conference yesterday on YouTube, and I noticed everybody was wearing something African. Now, there's a huge market for this in other African countries and abroad. Yeah. But we don't have anybody who has been able to scale enough to take advantage of this opportunity. Now, if we had a tailoring training academy where we were training 100 or 1,000 tailors to sew, then we automatically have the inputs, the skill sets required to produce on a large scale and begin to export and retail more widely. So there's so many opportunities. Creating impact, transforming people also leads to transforming the economy. So I think that philanthropists need to come together with impact investors to see how they can multiply their funds and really enjoy seeing their funds transform lives to become more independent, impactful, and transform the economy.
All right, thank you. There's so much to say. Okay, Funke, just a few minutes. We have to go into questions.
Very quickly. I want to start with what my colleague here, and Henrietta started with, saying that there's no dichotomy between giving and impact assessment. At least there shouldn't be.
And profitability.
Absolutely. And I think, just to your point, there really isn't a dichotomy either between people who give and send money, even for familial and individual ties, and entrepreneurship and impact assessment. Because most of that money does go towards promoting new businesses. And so the point is, if you're able to encourage, I think our point here is how do we incentivize it and make it more structured and more widespread. Exactly. And so if we're able to tap into and really activate the entrepreneurial spirit for many of the people in local communities and many Africans in different countries around the world, then they would be incentivized to give towards particular causes. They also want to see a return on investment, and the investment in this case doesn't necessarily have to be monetary, as Martin said. It could be that this project that you said you were going to do was completed.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Questions? There's so much to talk about, but we want to take some questions from the audience, and then we can continue to have the conversation. Okay, sorry. It's old age. Can you to the mic, please? Thank you. If you have any questions, just move to the mic and then we'll just take a few.
Good morning, everyone. My name is OJ. I serve as the Executive Director of YEDI. I've spent about a decade working on youth empowerment and development, and I also got interested in the concept of impact investment, and I took myself to DC to learn a bit more about that. And I left a bit much more confused, and the class was also confused. And I just wanted to say this. Someone said, not everything that counts can be counted. Impact investment, to the best of my knowledge, often tilts itself to that. There are lots of sustainable models you could implement to be self-reinforcing and self-sustaining without return on investment. Oftentimes with impact investment, we all know it's a return on investment in terms of cash.
Yes.
Right? We don't need that. What we need is a model, and I could give an example. You train the underserved youth who lack in skills, ensure they get jobs where they commit to giving back some funds to support the system that got them that opportunity. That's impact investment. But whereas you come up and talk about some percentage of ROI, it's never going to always work that way with the situation we find ourselves in lots of countries. So that's my point. Really.
Thank you very much.
Can I help him?
Any other question, please? before we go back? All right. I was going to ask Martin. Okay, Ndidi, sorry.
Good morning. My name is Ndidi Muneli. So I wanted to ask about models, both from Martin and Kofi, that you've seen in the US and UK to foster local giving from companies. So I'll give you an example. Ford Foundation has an employee matching scheme where when employees give, the company matches. And I'm sure there are many, many examples to ensure structured giving where everybody can participate. Can you share some of those models that we can replicate in African businesses and in companies here?
Thank you. Can you also just mention in terms of volunteerism as well? I know that's another side of it. So if you use the two examples, volunteerism and also structured employee giving. So we'll just take this last one and then we'll answer a few questions.
Yeah, Yvonne Moore from More Philanthropy. And more of a comment than a question, but I'd love to hear what you think about it. I just want to be careful when we talk about the issue of dependency in or on philanthropy, that we also reflect on how we are actually giving dependency. So that when we talk about dependency, that we don't put all of the onus on the nonprofit or the NGO, that we also talk about the way we fund, whether we nickel and dime grantees, whether we don't give them general operating support, the room to actually do leadership development, professional development, those kinds of things, just so that we're also self-reflective as we talk about these things. Dependency can be an issue, but I think we also need to look at how we actually fund. Do we actually invest in a way that gives them opportunity?
It has to be both sides, not just on one side. Thank you so much. Okay, Martin.
Well, yeah, okay. Thank you. There's some great questions there, and I think the first person who asked the question about, impact and try to measurement and thinking through where's my money gone and what is actually done. I mean, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and so sometimes it is very difficult to measure these things. But I think it's really important that you do try to get through. Indeed, he asked about models and employee giving, perhaps, and how you actually get into a structured type of sense. I mean, I think partnerships with that are absolutely critical because I think one individual foundation like ourselves cannot do it alone. We have to rely on Gates Foundation, the UK government. We have to rely on Tata Trust. We've got to rely on Dangote Foundation. We've got to rely on a lot of other foundations to be able to collectively come to a point where you do things in collaboration, which are more impactful than doing things in isolation. And I think that's a really important point. And secondly, and to Yvonne's point about dependency, what we try to do, and I think it's really important that we all try to think through, is that word sustainability. Again, often used but misunderstood. It would be an abject failure if the Power of Nutrition went back to the same community with the same interventions 5 years later. So working through and strengthening government systems, that's not everybody's cup of tea, by the way, but thinking through how can a system be taken on and be sustainable when you have left. It is no point in putting through philanthropy or indeed any investment if somebody else is not going to take up that particular cause and continue to fund it through individual either giving or indeed from a non-for-profit. And then I just think one thing I would say, hopefully controversial because I deeply wish it to be so, is that the private sector, if you don't get private sector engagement, we're not going to reach the SDGs. Yeah. So two things on that. One is, if you're a philanthropist, prepare for failure. And if you are a private sector corporate, prepare for regulation. Because that is what is going to come down the road if we do not collaborate together. Totally
agree. Kofi? I think indeed.
So I think if I understood the first kind of question / statement, it's quite confusing, this impact investing area. And the way I think about it really is that with impact investing, you really, it is a very broad, diffuse area, but there are certain types of investing where you're basically just screening out certain things, like you might decide you're not going to invest in people who make arms. Or, it used to be people were divesting from companies that did business in apartheid South Africa, those kinds of things. And, or you might be looking to invest in companies that have reached some level of sustainability in their operations in terms of in their how they work with the environment. And that kind of stuff, kind of ESG types of screens, I think is a huge area. And there are NGOs that kind of set standards for this, and that area is growing a lot. The area that I think is much harder is what I'd call this mission-related investing area, where you actually are very, very clear about making an investment where you're trying to preserve the capital that you're investing, but you have another goal that you can measure and understand if it's succeeding. And I think that's the area that I think has been the hardest to get our arms around. I think, Ndidi, you asked about models for giving. So yeah, Ford is very generous. So for every dollar a Ford employee at any level in the organization, the same rule applies for everybody. And if you give $1, Ford will multiply it by 3. So long as it's to an organization that Ford has on a list that in the US, it's an IRS list. If you're qualified, if the organization's qualified for tax deductibility, then Ford will give the triple match. I think a lot of companies will do something similar to that. It may not be 3 times, it may be more like 2 times, but it really depends on the company. They will also do things, we heard an example yesterday, there'll be one day every 3 months where everybody works on a common project. So everybody volunteers their time. There will usually be a process where the staff figures out what that project will be, so that it's something people care about. And that's a way that they try to get people more engaged in their community. I spent a lot of time as a lawyer, and at law firms, it's often through pro bono work. So they measure how much time you spend on projects that have been approved as worthy, where you give away your time. Those are the kinds of models that people have been using.
Thank you. Funke, just the last word. We have to shut down in 2 minutes.
I think advocacy on this issue is very important. And to answer this question, how can we expand structured giving? Creating awareness around the fact that we need to give and to give for impact, I think is really important. And the model that I like a lot is GoFundMe. People go and tell their stories and they connect with other people, because people give when they're empathetic about a situation, when they can put themselves in that situation and say, I will give because this could be me. So if we use that kind of model to create advocacy around different causes that we want people to give for, that resonates, that tells a story, and then people will be interested in giving, then how do they give? Who do they give to? Right, we take away the credibility problem where we have a marketplace for giving. So there's like an online, almost like an eBay for giving, for institutions that you can give to. And then on the payroll giving, that's also a very, very important one. In Nigeria, I know we have the pension arrangement, which is similar to what we hear with the Ford. If people have information that they will get tax breaks if they give, I think that would also be really critical. So these are some areas in which we can start to actually ramp up that structured giving and try to get the tips across the organization.
Thank you. Henrietta?
Okay, so to my understanding, unstructured giving is charity, and philanthropy is structured giving. And impact investing is also giving in a way that creates impact as well as returns. So I think we need to be focused on what we want to see, our desired outcomes, so that we understand that we can use all these various tools to achieve those goals, because using one or the other will not be sufficient to address the problems that we see. We want to see a better world. And so I think all these various forms of giving should be encouraged and used together to achieve our collective goals. So all I would say is, based on the problem at hand, let's see what is required. Is it charity, which is usually individual giving in an unstructured way? Is it structured philanthropists coming together to address a larger goal? Say we want to address educational causes because that's where our future, our future depends on how well educated our population is, you know. And then impact, because we want to make sure that people are also empowered to be independent. So as far as I'm concerned, all these forms of giving can work together, and we have to find a way to, you know, synthesize or align all of these to address the problems that we see and achieve our desired outcomes.
All right, Kofi, just the last word.
Okay. Yeah, I realized I neglected the last question, which I think raised a very important point, and it was about dependency.
Yes.
And so one of the things that we've been learning in the U.S. Is that there's a very unequal relationship between a grant-making institution and their grantees. And so, you know, the grant-making institution announces that it's focusing on some things. Magically, a whole lot of organizations now make it their focus, and then they pitch it. And so one of the things that we realized at Ford was that we were measuring the success in terms of our grants and not in terms of our grantees. And so what we started to realize was it was actually an exploitative relationship. Any success Ford has in any grants are because of amazing work done by grantees. And so what we decided to do was just be honest about a lot of the key institutions that we work with, that we know we're going to be working with for the long term, and say to them, we will provide you a certain amount of money that's just your general operating support, right? Exactly. And then let's have an honest conversation. Now you know you're not desperate for our money. Let's have an honest conversation about the best way we can work together.
All right, it's our time. It's time up, sorry guys. Thank you so much, Funke, Martin, Henrietta, and of course Kofi. And thank you everyone for listening. We have a 10 minutes break. So in 10 minutes we ask everyone to come back so we can continue with the conversations. Thank you everyone.